What's up, YouTube? Ram Thorburn here, back with another hip shot response video. I tried to actually put this out yesterday. I was using some software called OBS, and it wasn't, the video is very choppy, so I had to figure something out. I'm trying some new software here, so hopefully this will work just fine. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notification bell. We all know that voices like mine are the first to be taken out back and old yellered by the folks at Big Tech, so I really do appreciate the help in terms of getting the numbers up. So please, if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe. And if you are interested in actually contributing to the channel, there are some ways listed below in the description that you can contribute and help get this channel up and running. But today we're going to be talking about China and the new China task force that Trump has formed with House Republicans. And we've got a Fox News video here with Mike Waltz. So let's go ahead and take a look at this, and we'll talk about what's going on with China at large.
House Republicans have launched a new task force to look at the Chinese government's role and potential culpability in the spread of coronavirus beyond China's borders back in December. Joining me now is a member of that newly formed, brand new task force, Florida Congressman Michael Waltz. Congressman, thanks so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jillian. Thanks for covering this.
So as I understand it, this new task force is looking a little backwards, looking at what China's government knew when they knew it, and then it's also looking a little forwards, how to hold the Chinese government potentially accountable. Is that right?
Now, I would be interested to see if this Chinese task force, I know it's going to be focused on coronavirus, especially to begin with, but I would be interested to see if it is going to talk about or investigate how to deal with China in the future. And maybe what has positioned China to be on the world stage in the malevolent manner that they are. So I'd be interested to see where all this goes. But let's go ahead and listen to what Mike Waltz has to say.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this was clearly a cover-up, and I think you will see a number of groups help unfold what China has done to unleash this virus and to not manage it. But I think we're also, as you mentioned, looking forward. And what I like about this task force is it has representatives from all over the country, all types of rural, urban, and other districts. And it covers a wide variety of committees, everything from trade to finance to health to education, of course, military, because what China is doing, as it explicitly seeks to dominate a new world order where it calls the shots, not the United States.
And that's interesting that he actually used the term New World Order. You know, that's kind of a term we hear thrown around in conspiracy theory circles and things like that. But it is interesting that he did say New World Order and that they are actually looking to dominate on the world stage. And after this video, I think we should talk a little bit about the actual process of how we opened up China and who all was involved in that. And maybe open up some questions about maybe was there some sort of plan for a New World Order in the entire opening of China to begin with. But we'll get into that later. But let's go ahead and get back to Mike Waltz here.
Is it has a whole of society, whole of government approach, and that's how we're looking to combat what they're doing from the United States perspective.
One thing the task force doesn't have, though, is Democrats. And we've seen reports this week that Speaker Pelosi originally was going to join up with you guys. It was going to be a bipartisan task force, but she later reneged. Tell us about what went wrong.
I mean, of course there are no Democrats on here. I mean, we've heard Donald Trump accuse Hunter Biden of going into China and then flying out on Air Force Two with $1.5 billion. We've seen Senator Dianne Feinstein. She's been very involved in business relationships with China, actually made San Francisco a sister city to Shanghai. And then, of course, just a couple years ago, her driver turned out to actually be a Chinese spy. So I think we are going to find out that Democrats are heavily involved in a lot of the things that go on with China. And I hope this Chinese task force will be investigating that as well.
Well, I don't know why she reneged, but this has been these negotiations been ongoing from some time. I think Democrats absolutely should be involved. This is a national security issue. In fact, I think this will be the national security issue, much like how we had to face the Soviet Union for most of the 20th century. This will be the case for the 21st century. This shouldn't be about politics, but I think two things are at play here. Number one, presidential election year. Joe Biden is so bad on this issue, he thinks the rise of China to compete and eventually try to dominate America is an okay thing. He's on record many times as doing that. And then number two, this kind of narrative the Democrats want to craft, that anytime we want to deal with China, it's a distraction from their perspective of what they believe were President Trump's failings. That's just ridiculous. This is about dealing with what I think is the most existential threat to the United States, to liberty around the world, to a free world order that we've.
I love that. Free world order. Free world order. And yes, of course the Democrats are always going to talk about dealing with China as a distraction to what Trump should be doing, because they are invested in China. They are invested in China becoming a bigger player on the world stage. And I think that needs to be investigated very thoroughly with this China task force. And since we have no Democrats on the task force to obstruct, we should be able to get to the bottom of some things.
Ever faced.
So is the task force, I guess this is really a two-part question for you. Number one, is the task force planning to do investigating of its own? And then number two is, once you have a handle on what the Chinese government knew about the virus and when, we got the facts and the timeline ironclad, are you going to present your findings to President Trump, or where do you hope to take it, I guess is the question.
So we'll incorporate a lot of what the intelligence community is doing. We'll receive a series of classified briefings. But I think what you'll see coming out of this is really pulling together a number of efforts. Julian, we've talked about what we're trying to do to bring our supply chains home, how we're blocking our federal pensions and even several dozen of our state pension plans from investing in Beijing, how they're stealing our technology, trying to put our companies out of business economically, and then, of course, compete with us militarily. So, what you're going to see is pulling all of that together for some legislative packages and then recommendations to the president.
Yeah. Another really important element of that package you're working on is seeking to hold the Chinese Communist Party responsible for what you're calling infiltration of U.S. universities. Tell us about the Chinese efforts on that front.
Well, I don't know that many Americans appreciate. There's over 400,000 Chinese students in our universities as we speak. That doesn't make them bad kids. What they need to understand is that they're victims. The Chinese Communist Party forces them to vacuum up our technology, robotics, advanced materials, artificial intelligence, and send it back to Beijing, where it gets fast-tracked right to the Chinese military. That's one piece. The other.
Now that's a very interesting point to make. 400,000 Chinese students in American universities. That is a massive number. And he's right. A lot of these are probably really good kids who want to do good things in the world. But the unfortunate thing is that at the end of the day, they have no control over the fact that they're going to be pawns to the Chinese government, to the Chinese Communist Party. So I don't think we should be having all of these Chinese students coming over here and sucking up all of this information from the American technological system and then going back to China where, to no power of these students, they're still going to have to make a living, so they're going to have to go and work for this Chinese Communist Party, because if you live in China, you essentially work for the Chinese Communist Party. They're going to end up having to give that away, and it's going to weaken us. So as much as we want to have some sort of empathy for these Chinese students that are coming over here, we want them to be able to get an education and learn, they're not going to be benefiting us in the long run. They're actually going to be benefiting our adversaries. And so there comes a time when there's compassion and there's self-sacrifice, but we can't be self-sacrificing out of compassion for these students when we know that it's going to be building up for our enemies. So we're going to have to start taking some action on that. But let's hear. I think he's about to start talking about some of the professors here that are selling out information. Let's see what he's going to be going into here.
Other pieces are actually recruiting American professors through what they call China's Talents Program. These professors are taking hundreds of billions of dollars into their institutions in taxpayer-funded research funding and these advanced technologies, and then going and moonlighting over in Beijing's universities, including the Wuhan Institute of Technology. My legislation seeks to stop both. We cannot look. China is looking to dominate us technologically, then economically, and then eventually militarily. It's in Chinese leadership writings, and it has to stop.
And we've actually heard some stories recently. Some professors, I forget which university it was. Part of me wants to say Harvard. Part of me wants to say that's the wrong college. But we've heard of certain professors that have gotten arrested because they were withholding the fact that they were getting massive amounts of money from the Chinese government to sell out the research they were doing at their university to the Chinese Communist Party. It's a big problem, especially as we're seeing more and more pro-Chinese sentiments coming out of our mass media. A lot of things to look out for here, but let's go ahead and get to the end of this video here.
Right, well, Congressman, we got to leave it there. An important message.
So that was pretty much it. Okay. Now, one thing that I did want to talk about is the opening up of China. You heard Mike Waltz there talk about, he mentioned a new world order with China as the figurehead of it. And we have to kind of look into when we opened up China. The architect of opening up China was Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State under Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. And Henry Kissinger is a very controversial figure. He won a Nobel Prize, and I believe two of the people on the panel of the Nobel Prize actually quit after they decided to award it to Kissinger. Because Kissinger has a lot of very controversial, very almost scary views on how war can be used by the elites to create a new world order. He is a globalist, and he does have some interesting views on China, and by interesting, I mean scary. So let's go ahead and take a look at this one quote here from Henry Kissinger. He says, "China is a country with a record of continuous self-government going back 4,000 years, the only society that has achieved this. One must start with the assumption that they must have learned something about the requirements for survival, and it is not always to be assumed that we know it better than they do." So you can see that Henry Kissinger had a sort of reverence for China, even as they were the Chinese Communist Party, that are a little alarming, or at least to say that if you're the Secretary of State of America, of the United States, you should at least believe that America has the recipe for success, and to not go ahead and give credence to the idea that China might have an actual better system. So it is kind of scary that he opened up China and had these beliefs that, maybe China has it right and we have it wrong. That's kind of a scary thing. But we look at a lot of these globalists and you hear about this whole New World Order concept. And I think a lot of what they're looking at, they're using China as the model. And so when we look at another Henry Kissinger quote from the Bilderberg meetings back in 1992, he was giving a speech and he didn't realize that one of the Swiss delegates was actually recording what he was saying, and it ended up leaking out. So this is what he said. "Today, Americans would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow, they will be grateful. This is especially true if they were told there was an outside threat from beyond, whether real or promulgated, that threatened our very existence. It is then that all peoples of the world will pledge with world leaders to deliver them from this evil. The one thing every man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by their world government." This is one of the scariest things that you can ever possibly imagine, that you had a U.S. Secretary of State that is behind closed doors in what was supposed to be a secret meeting talking to powerful world leaders about a plan to create a world government that people will relinquish their freedoms to in order to be granted safety. Now, we all know, Benjamin Franklin, those that are willing to sacrifice a little bit of liberty for a little bit of security deserve neither and will lose both. This man is that incarnate. And considering that he is the one that went ahead and opened up China in the 1970s, it is at least fair to raise the question whether there were some domestic players on the American side, on our foreign policy side, as Trump likes to call the State Department, the Deep State Department, that actually had a plan, a globalist plot to create a world government, and that it might be possible that China is the model. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that this is definitely the case, or that, this is what's happening, but I do think that it should be investigated, that questions need to be raised, that it is healthy to ask these questions. Because if you don't ask these questions, the answer is going to come after your freedoms are already gone. And as an American, as somebody who loves America, I'm a flag-waving American. I love our liberty. I love our freedoms. The last thing I ever want to do is see us sold out by our own people, and we just stood by and let it happen because we were afraid to ask the questions, because we were afraid to be called a conspiracy theorist, because we saw the evidence right in front of us, but we kept our mouth shut. So we were intimidated into keeping our mouth shut. So I do think we need to ask these questions, and hopefully, I have no idea what the scope of this this China task force is going to be, but I do think that I'm hoping that they look into some of this stuff, look into some of the plans of these globalists, and seeing how some of our own foreign policy might have positioned China to be in the place to actually set out this Wuhan virus, the Wu flu, as I like to call it, or the Kung Pao Sicken, and whether there was actually a plan to create China as a world power. I don't know. I'm not saying that with any kind of definitive theory, but I think it's a question that needs to be investigated. So hopefully that's going to be part of the plan. Anyways, like I said, if you haven't, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel. I've got a new episode of Revved Up coming. We're going to be talking about the Michael Flynn exoneration and Obamagate. So I'm trying to do a pretty thorough job investigating the different players involved in this. So I'm hoping to have that video out by the end of this week, but I make no promises. There's a lot of work that goes into this. So stay tuned for the next episode of Revved Up, as well as some more of these hip shot videos with the man with no name here. So anyways, that's it for today. I hope you guys have a good day and check back, and hopefully I'll see you here tomorrow. Have a good one.